Welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to be taking a look at a very aggressive Flygon deck for the 2007 format. Now, to give a little bit of history and a little bit of backstory on Flygon in general, the first Flygon was released back in Hole and Phantoms, which was legal in the 2006 format, but it didn't really have a ton of support, so you didn't see many decks with it. And with the Flygon for the 2006 format, there was a group of Minnesota players that played a Flygon Pidgeot deck that found some success because you had the Flygon that hit for a pretty consistent 60 damage, and then Pidgeot from Hole and Phantom shut off all Pokebodies, which was very strong at the time in the 2006 format. People really weren't playing counters to it. It found a little bit of success at some gym challenges, but it didn't see any sort of mainstream success until you get to the 2007 format and we get Dragon Frontiers, which releases Flygon EX. Now, Flygon EX just does everything right. The card really has no weaknesses to it. It's an EX. It's got 150 hit points. Being Psychic type is actually pretty solid. 3 energy for 80 is fantastic. And then 10 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon that already have any damage counters on them. So you get a little bit of additional chip damage on the bench. 2007 format in particular, there's a lot of big EX Pokemon that just kind of sit on the bench. So you can build up some damage with that Psychic Pulse. Cards like Absol EX, for example. And eventually over the course of a game, you might just snag a couple of free prizes off something like that. It's got the Pokebody sand damage, and which means as long as Flygon's your active Pokemon, you put 10 damage on each of your opponent's bench Pokemon in between turns. If you get a very, very early Flygon and you can start getting that chip damage in before your opponent's able to evolve everything, you'll find yourself getting a lot of easy knockouts over the course of the game. You can just be stealing prizes off of your opponent if you can get that early sand damage in. Like hitting a turn 1 or turn 2 Flygon isn't very common, but if you do get that and get to build up some of that bench damage while your opponent's struggling to set up, you basically win the game from that point on. Now, between the Flygon that accelerated energy and then Flygon EX, it was pretty obvious Flygon was a deck. In 2007, Colin Mall was actually the one that broke the format with it, and he ended up playing, it was like a Flygon toolbox called Argon, but essentially it played Flygon, Flygon EX, Executor, Rayquaza, EX, Delta, and essentially it was just a bunch of Delta species Pokemon. You use Flygon to accelerate energy, and then Flygon EX was just kind of the big powerhouse of the deck that really just swung at your opponent. Over the course of the format, it found some moderate success with stuff. There were several in the top 16, top 8 at Worlds that year, and it actually won, I believe, the juniors division as well. Now, there was a handful of different ways to play it. The first was the toolbox Argon variation, which I will say found more success in the Masters division. And then the other variation was a Flygon Eeveelutions deck, which I'll say was played more and found more success in the lower divisions. I think the Flygon EX with Eeveelutions is a slightly easier deck to play, and that the Masters players preferred having more of those options. But today, we're going to go back to just one simple approach. Flygon EX is really good. And what's the easiest way for us to take advantage of that? And the idea behind the deck I'm going to show you today is we don't need all of those cool little tricks. When you're smacking your opponent for 80 damage and stealing free prizes off the bench, let's just try to do that as much as possible. We don't need to take advantage of little weaknesses things or try to do little spreading tricks or play different things with some of the prizes that Argon tries to do. We're just going to say you need to knock out multiple Flygon EXs to win a game, and we're probably going to beat you before you do it. Which is why we went with the Flygon Eeveelution deck. Now, this is far more streamlined than the World's variation of the deck. And I'm also going to say there is a ton of different ways you could do this deck. Every single time I built this list, I always came up with about 65 cards, and then I had to kind of cut it down. So there's definitely some arguments on how many of things to play, what not to play on things. But I'm going to take you through my list and show you a lot of the choices that I made. Now, for the start here, I went with 3 cast form, 1 Jirachi. Jirachi didn't see a whole lot of play in the 2007 format. Everyone just played very heavy Holin's cast form engines because both players would just kind of sit behind cast form and then try to draw cards, especially with no real hand disruption in this format. Just being able to Delta draw was really, really strong. The advantage of Jirachi is it gives you a bit of consistency where you don't have to attach an energy to do it. So if there's a situation where you're behind or you're having a hard time setting up and you want to commit that energy to, let's say, a Vibrava or a Flygon EX, you can commit your energy to something else and then still do that Wishing Star. There's pros and cons to both, but being able to have that Jirachi and the cast form give you a little bit more selectability with the deck. Now, I also want to note where if we open something like Trapinch and say, let's just say we open Trapinch and like Holland Mentor, we can Mentor, grab Jirachi, Holin's Magnemite, retreat the Trapinch, and then get that Wishing Star off, where if we were playing just 4 Holin's cast form, we wouldn't be able to do that because we wouldn't be able to retreat the Trapinch and also Delta Draw on the same turn. So that's why we play the split, and I think playing 1 of Jirachi and a lot of setup decks in the 2007 format is incredibly strong. Now, outside of the Delta Draw, it also counts as a Holin's energy, so you can attach it to one of your Pokemon and have it provide 2 energy. It also bounces an energy, which is incredibly strong in this deck with the Flygon because it just gives us another energy to retreat. So let's say we had a Flygon EX with a Psychic Energy active, and then we can go Holin's cast form, bump the Psychic Energy, then we can use Flygon to play the Psychic Energy back down, and all of a sudden we changed 1 energy into 3 energy with just a Holin's cast form. So it brings the deck a lot of utility. I will say at only 3 copies, you do need to play a little bit more carefully with it, and I found myself having to be very aware of if I've prized any, how many I've got, where they're at, and are they in the deck, are they in the hand, just because they are so impactful. Now, I went with 4 Trapinch. This one I think is just the strongest one. 50 HP. Yeah, it's just, I think, the best Trapinch. There's a couple different ones you can play, but I think that extra 10 hit points. The weakness to Grass is considerably better than some of the other weaknesses in the deck. I went ahead and split the Vibrava line. This Vibrava is actually really good in this format. That Sonic Noise attack can be so incredibly strong, but at the same time, too, having Free Retreat can also be very nice. I went ahead and split them. I'm going to say that if you didn't want to split them, I would say play just 2 of this copy. This one does have some uses, but typically the other one's just going to be a little bit stronger. Also pretty unusual. Most times, very rarely are stage 1s going to be rares. So for that, Vibrava to earn a rare spot in Dragon Frontiers was a little off-brand for the Pokemon Company. Went with 3 Flygon EX. That's going to be our main attacker. We want to force our opponent to knock out 3 copies of this guy to win the game. 2 Flygon from Delta Species. Once again, this is mainly in there just for that Delta supply, but it can also be a very solid attacker, and it can also be a single prize attacker. So sometimes it's very nice to weave those into our prize trades. So essentially, we can try to force the opponent to knock out 3 Flygon EX and then 1 Flygon for a total of taking 7 prizes. That 7 prize game is just so important when playing some of these 2006, 2007 format games here. Now, we went with 2 Eevee, 2 Jolteon EX. Now, a couple of things to note here. Yes, this is the worst Eevee, but it has synergy with the Delta Draw. And generally speaking, being able to get an extra card off a Delta Draw is going to be stronger for us as a deck than coming in and being able to use Call for Family. You can debate that a little bit, but generally speaking, that extra draw is going to be better. And then we went with 2 Jolteon EX. You want to get that 10 damage on your opponent's bench. Now, this does a couple of different things. One, that Flygon EX, if you don't get a very early Flygon and get that initial damage on your opponent's bench, you miss out on that bonus damage from Psychic Pulse, because it only does 10 damage to your opponent's bench if they already have damage counters on them. So that Jolteon is going to put 10 on everything, and then that Psychic Pulse is going to build up additional damage. Now, Jolteon in a pinch can be an okay attacker, but as an EX for 100 HP, generally we're going to want to avoid doing that. So General strategy is going to be try to rush out Flygon as quickly as possible. Use Jolteon to put 10 damage on your opponent's bench, and then you're just going to start Psychic Pulsing, trying to not only smack your opponent in the edge spot for 80, but also getting that built-up bench damage. Going along with that, there's a couple of other things where essentially that bench damage, it's kind of twofold. You think it's going to be like you're going to be taking all these free prizes off things, but a lot of times once they're actually able to evolve their bench Pokemon, it's hard to get some of those cheap prizes on the bench, because if they're evolved into something high hit points, like let's say 80, 90, 100 hit points, you're essentially doing at least, let's say, 5 or 6 Psychic Pulses to knock out a bench sitter. And to be honest with you, at that point, if you're already doing like, let's say 5, 6, 7, 8 Psychic Pulses in a game, if you're getting that many Psychic Pulses off, you probably win that game already. What's far more impactful is essentially setting up one-hit knockouts for Flygon. So like a great example of this is going to be if you're playing against like Infernape, where that Infernape at 100 hit points can cause Flygon a lot of problems. But if you can get, let's say, an Evolutionary Thunder off, do 10 damage to all your opponent's bench, and then you Psychic Pulse, and you put 10 more damage on, let's say, a Monferno, for example, by the time they evolve into an Infernape, they're already going to have 20 damage on them, and they're going to get one-hit knocked out by Flygon with that Psychic Pulse. So setting up one-hit knockouts for Flygon is usually a lot more common than taking free prizes off the bench. But, of course, the free prizes on the bench will come, which is another reason that we play Absol EX. We're just throwing so many damage counters all over the place. That Cursed Eyes Pokebody or Pokepower will come into play quite a lot. It's absolutely game-changing. I've thought about playing a second Absol in here because of how impactful it is, either to steal a free prize off the bench or to get a knockout on something the opponent thought was safe. Just when we're already hitting for 80, being able to move that additional 3 damage counters is just so incredibly strong for the deck. One Chime Echo. We play such a heavy Hollins engine. Got to get those free energy back. One Hollins Magnemite. We want that searchable energy off Mentor. And then one Lunatone, one Solrock. You can debate it, but I think the Infernape matchup is near impossible if you don't. I won't say near impossible, but it's pretty bad unless you play the Lunatone Solrock. If you play the Lunatone Solrock and you get an okay start, I think you can win that matchup a majority of the time, as long as you can get that cheap initial bench damage off. Now, I think we made some cuts to play that Lunatone Solrock. I think that's where your second Absol EX comes from. I think that's where your second Warp Point comes from. Just a lot of different things that we played. We chose to play the Lunatone Solrock over. So if you're thinking there's not going to be a whole lot of Infernape, it's perfectly fine to drop that for something else. But I like playing the Lunatone Solrock just because of how much Infernape I see. All right, we got 4 Transceiver, 3 Mentor. Ironically enough, in 2007, the 3 Mentor wasn't super common. A lot of players played 2. And that was one of the things I kind of noticed when they did a large 2007 tournament. I think it was like a year and a half ago. Like, all the players, I won't say all the players, but like a majority of players just played 2 Mentor. And I just don't think that's good. Which is, I also find kind of ironic is, I won't say ironic, but when players come back and they play a format, a lot of times they just kind of come in and then copy a lot of the decks from the past, which is perfectly fine. You can do that, but I think sometimes the more you test a certain format and the more you kind of play that certain format, you notice things. And I think if you play, 30 or 40 games of a format, you're going to notice that that third copy of Mentor and getting that initial Mentor off is just so much stronger. And I think a lot of players are starting to realize that in 2006 as well. You're seeing a lot more 3 Mentors in a deck instead of 2 Mentors in a deck. 2 Copycat, not a whole lot of disruption in this format, so you're able to play Copycat, usually get pretty decent hand sizes, anywhere from 6 to, I would say, 11, 12 cards. 2 Researcher, you really only need 1, but you can't afford to prize it when you need it, so we play 2 Researcher. 2 Steven's Advice. The deck can play its hand down, and especially early in the game, it's very nice to have that Steven's Advice to get that big 4 or 5 cards off while you and your opponent are both setting up here. 1 Adventure, 1 Holland Scientist, and then 1 Elms Training. So we kind of split this here. We go with 2 Researcher and then 1 Elms. So the 1 Elms is another way. It's kind of a third Eeveelutions to be able to search out here. And then it can also grab the same stuff that Research will grab a lot of the time, like a Vibrava, Flygon EX, Flygon, So we do, quote unquote, have 3 search cards along with the 4 transceivers. So we have quite a few ways to find our evolution. Went with 3 Windstorm, 1 Giant Stump. Generally speaking, Windstorm is going to be better. And I had 4 in here for a long time. But that 1 Giant Stump does add some utility to the deck. To not only keep certain decks in check, like Meta Knight, for example, but at the exact same time, too, it's also kind of nice to reset that Absolute EX. Oh, I guess, I'm sorry, you're not going to reset Absolute EX, but it's kind of nice to keep certain things in check, or if you have to get certain Pokemon out of play, you can Giant Stump, like a Flygon EX, for example. 1 Warp Point. Warp Point's just good. I'd like a second one here. We only play 1. Just due to space. In the original lineup, you got 6 Psychic, 1 Lightning, and then 4 Delta. Delta works for a couple of different things. It'll fulfill the Flygon's requirements along with the Flygon EX, and you got some ability to get it back for the Chimecho. Just a great utility card. And then that 1 Lightning Energy is if we do need to attack with Jolteon, we have that in addition to the 3 Delta draws. 3 Holin's Cast Form, but typically speaking, Jolteon is not going to be a very common attacker for the deck. A couple other things I want to talk about. I know, like, the Worlds list, for example, went heavier with the Eeveelutions, and ended up playing stuff like Vaporeon. Typically speaking, I haven't found a lot of situations where playing a wide array of Eeveelutions was beneficial for me, and I preferred just to play the straight Eevee Jolteon combination. I played the deck with Super Scoop Up, which was actually really strong. It was nice to be able to pick up like the Jolteon EX, or actually pick up a damaged Flygon, but I cut him mainly due for space. Other than that, I honestly do think this is a Tier 1 deck in the 2007 format, and it's one of the better decks in the format. I think there's a lot of different ways you can play and tech it, but I will say this is a Tier 1 deck for the 2007 format. If you have any questions or anything, put them down below, and I hope to see you in the next video.